Hello, church planners. I appreciate your effort in taking time to watch this short video. I hope it'll be helpful to you in recruiting volunteers. I have provided a listening sheet for you with some fill in the blanks to hopefully help you to stay awake as you listen. So let's get started with how to recruit volunteers. Volunteers are the lifeline of ministry. Out of all the people involved in ministry in local churches and church plants, 99% of them are going to be volunteers. We have to have a strong volunteer base in order to make all of our ministries successful. For most pastors and church planners, we never have enough willing people. Or do we? Perhaps the major conflict is not willing people, but maybe it's a lack of knowing how to recruit them. Let me share with you a typical model for church recruiting. Usually whenever we have a job in the church or in a church plant that needs to be done, we make some kind of public announcement. There's pulpit announcements where we get up behind the pulpit and we beg people or implore people to come and help us in various ways in the church. Also, we publish things in the church bulletin or perhaps even in the newsletter, or we use some other type of public forum where we make the need known to people that we need volunteers, and we ask for people to approach us and to volunteer to fill those responsibilities. There are some typical motivating factors for church recruiting, or typical motivation for church recruiting, and the first one is what I call panic. A lot of times we just feel like we have to have a job done and we don't have anybody to fulfill that job, and so we panic. And so we are willing to take anyone that is breathing and anyone that is willing to step into a room and fulfill a responsibility. And that's really not a good motivation for church recruiting. The second one is responsibility. A lot of times we feel like that people in our church have a responsibility to fulfill a certain task, and they do. All Christians have a responsibility to do all they can to keep the work of the ministry going on, but that's not a good motivating factor for us to recruit people. The last one that I'll mention is guilt, and we've probably all been guilty of doing this at some time, but we get up and we make people feel guilty about not serving. And again, that's really not a good motivation for church recruiting. So let me share with you briefly a new model for church recruiting. And I say new model because I think probably it's not a model that we use a lot in recruiting volunteers, but I think it's a better way. And let me just insert here that all of these things that I will mention comes after much prayer. We need to be praying very earnestly about every responsibility and every job that is open in the church, so that we can make sure that we get the right person for the right job. But the first thing I want to say about church recruiting is the best way is one-on-one. And when I say one-on-one, I mean that I, as the pastor, or I, as the church planter, after prayer, as I mentioned, go to a specific person about a specific job in the church. And so I go to them and I approach them one-on-one and share with them the responsibility that we have, or the job that we have to do in the church. Also, we need to recruit on a need based for a specific assignment. And what I mean by that is that we need to go to a person when we have a specific need and we ask them to fulfill a certain specific responsibility. A typical way that we would recruit volunteers, again, would be in some type of a public forum, and we might get up from the pulpit and say something like this: folks, we're in desperate need for workers in our children's ministry. That's not a good way to recruit a volunteer, but the truth is that's the way we do it a lot of times. I think a better way to do that is to say something like this. When you approach a person one-on-one and you talk to them, making eye contact, speaking to that one person, and say something like, I've noticed that you are especially gifted, and of course only say that if it's true, but say, I've noticed that you are especially gifted in working with younger children. I think you might be a really good fit for working with our 2 and 3-year-olds. We need you to work once a month in our children's church on Sunday morning. Would you be willing to pray about helping and committing to teach once a month for 6 months? That might be a little better motivation for a person to be willing to share. And there's several things that I said in that statement that I want to go over and mention. The first one is a time limit. A lot of times I think people are afraid to take jobs in the church because they know that if they ever volunteer, they're going to have that job until Jesus comes back. We are not good at finding new people to take over responsibilities. And so a lot of times people don't want to take a responsibility in the church because they just feel like it's going to be an eternal job that they'll never be able to step down from or to get away from. So make a specific time limit. Also, give them the ability to say no. Sometimes people need to say no, and we need to allow them to have that opportunity. It goes back to that guilt factor and responsibility factor that I mentioned earlier, that a lot of times when we ask someone to do something in the church, we don't give them the ability to say no. They feel pressure, they feel guilty, they feel the responsibility, and so they really may not be equipped or may not have the desire to really do what we're asking them to do, but simply because we ask them, they say yes, and then they're not the best person for the job. Also, possible referral. If a person says no, then perhaps they know someone else who might fit. And other people know people that you don't know, and they know other people's gifts and abilities sometimes better than you do. And so there's a possibility of getting a referral for a job, even if you approach someone and they don't feel like they can do it, but they can refer someone else to you. The next thing is choose people that can lead from their strengths. A lot of times, again, we're willing just to take a warm body, whoever's willing to say yes to do a job, and we need to place people in specific responsibilities according to their strong points in ministry and their strengths. And so choose people to lead from their strengths. And then also give clear guidelines up front and hold volunteers accountable. People expect to have guidelines. They expect to have parameters. And so I think a lot of times people want those things, and it helps them serve better if we give them those things. And we need to approach all of this with excitement. Not with that level of guilt or responsibility, but sharing with excitement the opportunity that this person has to work in a specific ministry or area in the church. Let me give you some other ideas about, I know most of you are past this point, but let me talk about recruiting a launch team. Because that also is something important in recruiting volunteers that may be helpful in an ongoing or on an ongoing basis for you as a church planner. The same principles that I've shared with you about recruiting volunteers for the church will work whenever you're recruiting volunteers to help you launch your new work. And sometimes we are in the work after we've launched and we find ourselves needing volunteers that we simply don't have in the church. And if you have a need that needs to be fulfilled in the church, but you don't have anyone in the church that can fulfill that, then what do? Well, I think then there is an opportunity to recruit outside of your church. And I know the main focus of planning a church is to reach the lost for Christ, but we also must have people on our team to help us get started. And so sometimes we have to look outside of our church to recruit some people that might be able to help us. And sometimes these people will live in the area. Sometimes they will live out of the area and may have to take a huge step of faith to help us if they have to move into a new area. But again, pray that God would lead others that you know. Pray that God would speak to them, that He would lead them to help you, and then approach the person, if possible, in person, and use the same techniques that I mentioned above to share your vision and ask them for a short-term commitment. Here's an example. You could say something like this. Bob, I've known you for a while, and I know your heart to see the lost come to Christ. And I'm stepping out on faith and planting a new church in Anywhere, America. The need there is so great. There are no Free Will Baptist churches in an area that has over 120,000 people, and there's very few evangelical churches. Can you just imagine what could happen if a strong Free Will Baptist church that was committed to win the lost was planted in that area? Well, this may not be for you, but I'd like to ask you to consider praying about going with me to help me for 9 months. With your gifts of reaching people and your talent to sing and play the piano, I could use you to help me build a foundation of people and to lead worship for us. I know this is a big decision, so would you pray with me about this for 1 week and then let me know how God is leading you? That's just an example of something that you could say, but you could certainly change whatever was necessary to make it fit the situation. But let me just close with this. Recruiting volunteers is a skill that every pastor and especially church planters need to develop and polish. I would encourage you to role play this and practice it with a friend or a coach. Sit down and think of every area of your current ministry that needs additional workers. Pray about who you already have in your church or people that you know outside of your church. And pray that God would prepare their hearts and then think about and plan what you're going to say to them. Invite them to be a part of an exciting adventure. Working for God is an amazing opportunity. It's time to recruit people with excitement and enthusiasm instead of guilt and begging out of a crisis. I pray that this is helpful to you and that many great volunteers will be recruited to help you win the lost.